Sometime after coming to Messiah, I started having problems with my right shoulder. I can't remember exactly when it started because I tried to ignore it. I've watched plenty of people have shoulder surgery, and that was something that I didn't want to have to do. The shoulder progressively got worse, and eventually I could not reach into the back seat of the car without sharp pain. The pain grew so intense that I finally decided that I didn't have any choice but to go to a doctor. The doctor followed the typical protocol of ordering an x-ray, prescribing some medication, and sending me to physical therapy. If that didn't work, I knew what was next. I tried the medication for about 3 days, but it was making me really sick, and there was no difference in the pain. I also made an appointment with a physical therapist who was old enough to be my daughter. As I began the physical therapy, I was instructed to do a lot of exercises that didn't make a lot of sense to me, but caused me a great deal of discomfort, and I was pretty sure that I was doomed to the surgical knife. As I continued with the prescribed physical therapy sessions, I began to make remarkable progress and was really impressed by how much the physical therapy was helping. By the end of it, I had recovered most of my range of motion and could now reach into the back seat of the car without the fear of sharp pain. As I was finishing my physical therapy, my therapist, I had now come to deeply appreciate, said that I would need to continue the exercises in order to maintain my progress. So you can probably guess what I did. Now, if you're thinking I neglected to do the exercises, then you're wrong. No, I became a convert to the exercises and have now worn out 3 of the rubber bands that are used to do those exercises. I've incorporated those exercises into my other morning routine of doing 120 sit-ups and 120 push-ups. If dedicating a few moments each morning to those exercises can keep me out of pain and away from the operating room, that's sufficient motivation. I'm deeply committed to avoiding pain and potential surgery. And you can have confidence that is what I really believe, because I take the time and exert the effort to do those exercises, which can help me to avoid those unpleasant possibilities. Now, I've subjected you to that story for purposes other than promoting the virtues of physical therapy or eliciting your sympathy about the woes of aging that I'm experiencing. I share it as a way of helping us to consider the next 2 chapters in our sermon series that we're calling A Blueprint for Christian Living, based on Kevin Watson's book, A Blueprint for Christian Discipleship. We're focusing on the 3rd general rule of Methodism as defined by John Wesley. If you missed the first 2, let me bring you up to speed by sharing the first general rule is do no harm, which I preached on a couple of weeks ago. And the second is do all the good you can, which Pia preached on last week while I was on the confirmation class trip in Philadelphia and New York. Even before I got back from that trip, people were sending me emails to tell me about what a great sermon Pia had preached. No one said anything about missing me or the sermon that I had preached the week before. Well, what's that about? I'll just let that go because I don't want you to violate the first two general rules by saying anything about that matter. The third and final general rule is practice the Christian disciplines. I mean, Pia gets do all the good you can, and I get stuck with practice the Christian disciplines, which is like your mother telling you to brush your teeth and wash behind your ears. Now, I really don't know how to make the Christian disciplines sexy or hip or avant-garde or whatever your preferred term for that which is really important and desirable and should be valued by everyone. I know that my electric, actually battery-powered but recharged with electricity, toothbrush has given me a whole new love for brushing my teeth because it does most of the work. But I haven't found such a device for the Christian disciplines. So you might be asking, what are the Christian disciplines? Well, you're actually probably aren't asking that, but I'm saying that to make you think you should be asking that. I'm talking about stuff like prayer, Bible reading, Christian fellowship groups, fasting, always popular, but most often distorted, acts of compassion, acts of justice, worship, and being nice to your pastor. Actually, I made up that last one, but anyway, it's the stuff of Christian living which actually helps us to live as Christians. The question becomes, how can I convince you that you really ought to try this stuff? And I thought it might be helpful to frame it in terms of how what we do betrays what we really believe. Let me elaborate on what I mean. I've been working with the church leadership at St. Matthew's as they work on a vision statement and think about the direction in which they want to move in their ministries. The district superintendent told them I was a consultant, which means that I act like I know something, which I don't. If you know people from St. Matthew's, please don't tell them the truth. But just so you know, I told them up front that I don't know what I'm doing, and I'm hopeful that they may teach me something that I can bring back to our ministry here at Messiah. So the last time we were together, they wanted to identify the values in their vision and mission statements. Now, I really don't know why they wanted to do that. I would have preferred to talk about some unconventional ministry idea for them to try out. But since I don't know what I'm doing, and I don't want them to find out, I acted like having a discussion on values in their vision and mission statement was the right thing to do. At the outset of the evening, everyone looked at me, and I knew they were waiting on me to tell them what to do. So in a very authoritarian sort of way that acted like I knew a lot more than I do, I said, maybe we should think about what St. Matthew's does. Because what we really believe is found in what we actually do. I noted that we often say that we believe certain things, but then do other things which have no correlation to what we claim to believe. I said it might be insightful to think about what we do in order to most accurately identify what we really believe. After a couple of hours of conversation in response to that suggestion, I was thinking I was about ready to call it an evening and summarized what I had heard with 7 key words. Most everyone was nodding in agreement when the pastor of the church, who I love very much and respect, made an outstanding point, and it was one that I, as the consultant, should have made. He asked how those values were any different from the Rotary. No disrespect to the Rotary Club, that is, how were the values distinctly Christian? Now, I could see they really weren't interested in that conversation. And so, as they tried to avoid it, I quickly wrote down what I thought could be distinctly Christian values. I wrote, God-centered, forgiving, prayerful, self-sacrificing, loving. Now, I'll be the first to admit that any first grader should be able to come up with such a list. However, the group preferred terms like committed, serving, welcoming, authentic, accepting, and generous, although I made that up and they didn't like that either. The whole conversation had shifted when one of my recommended words after listening to them had been devout, because I really thought they were a devout group of people. No one liked the word devout, and that gave rise to the Rotary question discussion. Devout sounded too antiquated, too religious. No one thinks about wanting to be devout in our savvy, sophisticated technological age. It's so passé. Now, if you don't know what devout and passé mean, Google them. To bring us back to Messiah and our sermon series, I want to invite each of us to think about what we do and how that likely betrays what we really believe. For instance, let's take a simple one: worship attendance. How many of you think it's important to attend worship on a regular basis? Raise your hands and keep them up. If you haven't raised your hand, I will make a pastoral visit to your home each night until you finally affirm that attending worship on a regular basis is important. Now, keep your hands up. I think that got a few more hands in the air. I was once trying to recruit a woman to lead a children's choir. When I stopped at her house, she was giving her children a bath. I said, I can see this is not a good time for me to visit. And if you would simply agree to lead the children's choir, I will leave immediately. You don't want me to do that to you, do you? I don't see any hands up. Who's that? I think I finally got everyone's hands up. You can put them down now. So, since all of you agree that regular worship attendance is important, the question becomes, what is regular worship attendance? An article reporting on Gallup polls that I read recently related that Gallup has traditionally given American Christians more credit than we deserve. The research revealed that 25% of Christians attend 3 out of every 8 Sundays, and these folks were classified as regular attenders. Now, it's 3 out of 8 Sundays, because what a lot of people are doing in the Gallup poll is they were counting going to weddings and funerals and all this other stuff as attending worship each week. Or let me restate it this way. The top 25% of worship attenders attend worship 37.5% of the time. Now, if you were the coach of an athletic team and your best players came to practice 37.5% of the time, would you be comfortable with that? Or, if you learned that your surgeon had attended classes in medical school all of 37.5% of the time, would you be comfortable with that? When I was living in Blacksburg, I got to know a Haitian pastor who had a congregation in Roanoke. In Haiti, everyone goes to church every Sunday. But you can guess what happens when Haitians immigrate to the United States. They assimilate so well that they only worship sporadically. If you purchase season tickets to something you like, then only attend it 37.5% of the time, I would say that you weren't really that interested. I would definitely have some thoughts about what you really believe. And I trust you would of me if I was acting that way. By the way, I attended all of my classes in seminary. Just think how bad it would be if I had only gone 37.5% of the time. You think it's bad now. Our scripture reading from Hebrews challenges us to challenge one another, to live into the lives made possible in Jesus Christ. It calls us to consider how we may spur one another on toward love and good deeds. The third general rule reflects our scripture reading. And Watson writes in the chapter for this week that these Christian practices help us synchronize what we say are the most important things with how we actually live our lives and spend our time and our money. Now, before my Presbyterian wife accuses me of promoting works righteousness, that is, that the things we do, like worship and prayer and fasting, earns us God's approval, let me quickly and briefly cover the next chapter on finding the balance and restate what I said in the first sermon in the series, that it all begins with God's grace. And anything we do is simply our response to God's grace. Don't worry too much about my marriage because my wife is out of town and she will never know I said these things unless you tell her. If she finds out, I'll know you're the ones who got me in trouble. This acknowledgement of God's grace in the way that we live out our faith is described quite nicely in David Brooks' book, The Road to Character, which I had told you before I had got at Barnes & Noble discount table for $8. To get 2 sermons out of an $8 book is a real bargain. Brooks, who is not a theologian, but a cultural pundit, writes, those of us in the mainstream culture are used to the idea that people get loved because they are kind, are funny, are attractive, are smart, are attentive. It's surprisingly difficult to receive a love that feels unearned. But once you accept the fact that you are accepted, there's a great desire to go meet this love and reciprocate the gift. If you are passionately in love with a person, you naturally seek to delight her all the time. You want to buy her presents. You want to stand outside her window singing ridiculous songs. This is a replica of the way those who feel touched by grace seek to delight God. They take pleasure in tasks that might please God. They work tirelessly at tasks that they think might glorify God. The desire to rise up and meet God's love can arouse mighty energies. And as people rise up and seek to meet God, their desires slowly change. In prayer, people gradually reform their desires so that more and more they want the things they believe will delight God rather than the things they used to think would delight themselves. The ultimate conquest of self, in this view, is not won by self-discipline or an awful battle within the self. It is won by going out of the self, by establishing a communion with God, and by doing the things that feel natural in order to return God's love. This is the process that produces an inner transformation. One day you turn around and notice that everything inside has been realigned. What we really believe will not be revealed by what we say, but by what we do. Therefore, let us place our trust in God's grace.